All right. So, I'm going to use as the base for today another story. This is the story of Groundhog Day, which back in the day used to mean that thing up in Punxsutawney, PA, but now it means a movie with Bill Murray, right? Bill Murray and Andy McDowell. And that's the one I'm going to use, the movie, which is derived from that scene. So, I don't know, the movie's probably 30 or 40 years old, so it's hardly like spoiler alert. You've probably never seen it or you're never going to. It's one of Beth, my wife's favourite movies, and I saw it many years ago, and I thought it was kind of this just little cheesy, light-hearted comedy thing, so I couldn't understand it. She said it several times, so okay, let's watch this again, I really want to see it. So we did, and I found it actually quite amazing. This is probably all recognise there's lots of Buddhist stuff in there, really. So using that as a point of departure, it starts off with this rather crusty weatherman, Bill Murray, whose name I think is Phil, which is also the name of the groundhog, right? So he does his weather forecast, and then he's got to go off with the crew to Punxsutawney the following day, and he's clearly not remotely happy about this. It's the last place on God's green earth he wants to be. Small town America, just nothing there. And Andy McDowell at that point is the new boss, and you've got this little sidekick, Larry, who's the cameraman. Anyway, so the three of them go off together, and Bill Murray's resenting every moment of it. He's just rude and obnoxious. They do the show, he can't wait to get off, can't wait to get in the van and get out of town. And then a blizzard blows in, which he predicted wouldn't happen because he's the weatherman, and it does, and they have to go back, and he is just hating it. So he gets up the following morning, and his alarm clock goes off, and I can't remember the song now, but anyway, the alarm clock goes off, and he doesn't quite recognise it, but it was the same as it was yesterday, and it's the same day, exactly the same day. So he has to go and do this damn interview again and talk about this silly little groundhog again and watch these people dressed up in their silly little uniforms doing their silly little small town thing. At least that's, you know. So, this of course goes on and on and on. And as he gets more and more upset with this whole thing, there's somebody who knew him in high school comes running up on the street and square and says, "Phil!" Introduces himself, and he's somebody who dated Phil's daughter. Phil dated his daughter, and he can't stand the guy, so he pushes him, and he lands in a puddle. And it gets worse, and he punches him. And this is samsara, right? I mean, it's just going around and around and around, and it's the same thing. And he gets just. And it's the reason I think it's interesting. It's just this happens in our lives. He decides he's going to go binge eating. Have you ever done that? But we do it all the time. Just foods we like. Like, we're probably after this we're going to go around to Mamak, and there's 2 or 3 things I like. Liking food and deciding you want more food because you like it. Just getting caught up on these stories. And that seeing it happen again and again, and the depth of getting caught up in the story becomes more visible as you watch this happen to Bill Murray in this movie. But it's there all the time for us. Every week I go to Mamak, and every week I'm replaying this Groundhog Day thing. Just getting caught up in my little food. And it's just all these little things. He has his chat line. He sees an attractive woman, and he says, "Where did you go to school?" And he remembers it. And the following day, he comes back and he says, "Riverdale High! We were together at Riverdale High. You remember me from Riverdale?" So he just, every day, because he's coming back, he can remember, he can learn and remember more. And I remember those days when I was in my 20s. Way too much alcohol. Way too much dating, candidly, way too much sex. It was just, it was kind of really exciting at the time, but it wasn't really exciting. I don't know what it was really, but it was highly sensual, the sensual pleasures. It was totally engaged in self-gratification. Very selfish, and totally engaged in pleasure. And looking back on it, it really wasn't in any way meaningfully pleasurable. It was just caught up in this short-term sensual pleasure, just like the food. So it's just watching Bill Murray get more and more caught up in that, because there's no consequence. He can do it, and then he just wakes up the following day as if nothing had happened. So he can just keep on doing it. There's no need for a regulator there. There's a regulator for us most of the time in our lives, but he had no need for a regulator. And take the regulator off, you can see, or I can see, where that mind of mine wants to go. But eventually, he's playing around with this, and goes and gets drunk one night, and he's hanging out in a bar with some people, and he says words to the effect of, have you ever wondered what it would be like if every day was exactly the same and there was no meaning or no purpose? And one of the guys who's next to in the bar, who's completely drunk, says, yeah, that about sums up my life. But he does. So by this point, Fuller tried escaping from that by all this self-gratification, all this jumping into, in Sanskrit, and Pali the word is bhava, becoming, being. So he tried to go into that, the world of existence, the world of creating, the world of pleasure. And he's realized that just flat out doesn't work. So he then does this stupid stuff of driving around like an idiot, trying to have accidents, trying to drive off cliffs, finding all these creative ways of committing suicide. And of course he just wakes up the following morning and it all goes on as before. But again, that's the side of abhava, non-existence. This is what happens when we try and cut stuff off. We try and kill stuff. The nature, I mean, even just at the level of Isaac Newton, you cannot create or destroy matter. You just can't. We didn't need Einstein and Max Planck and 20th century science to figure out conservation rules. You can't destroy stuff. You just push it down, it just pops up somewhere else. It's the whack-a-mole thing, right? So you can't get rid of it. And that's what Bill Murray was finding. But it is absolutely true in our lives. And again, it's the extreme example of it is literally exactly the same day every day, and it goes on and on and on for so long that brings it into such stark relief. But it is our lives. Chasing after good food, good vacations, all this fun stuff is never going to make us happy. It just can't. And getting rid of the bad stuff, getting rid of the things we don't want, that's never going to make us happy. It can't. It just flat out can't. So somewhere along the way, and he starts off because he's going to try and impress one of the women he's chasing after. I suspect it's Andy McDowell. But he decides, oh, that's right, because she likes French poetry and she likes piano, classical piano music. So he decides he's going to learn to speak French and he's going to learn to play the piano. So he starts having these really garbage piano lessons because he's horrible, right? But over time, and the movie cuts, I don't know how many hundreds of years it must cut, where they just keep on coming back every day, because at the end of it, he speaks fluent French and he is really good at the piano. But what happens in this interim is he shows up at the Hill where they do the television speech, and he does this wonderful, really touching, heart-moving speech. And Andy McDowell and the camera say, oh, wow, that was amazing. And they start trying to engage him in conversation. He says, thank you, that's really very nice and I appreciate it, but I've got to go, I've got stuff to do. And he goes rushing off and he looks at his watch and he runs down the street, looks up at a tree, holds his hands out, a kid chops down and catches the kid. And then he rushes off into a restaurant where somebody's asphyxiating and he does the Heimlich maneuver and saves his life. And he's figured out over all of this time, all the little tragedies that are happening and all of it's not even good anymore, it's just his life. So his life has just naturally shifted by being immersed in samsara, by being exposed to all of this suffering. He has gradually just come to see this suffering. And he's gradually just come to be with this suffering. And it is beautiful to just see, it's just intuitive and natural to him to go every day. He doesn't have to do it. He could go back to bed and do it the following day. He could take a day off. He doesn't. Every day he runs around and he saves the boy and he saves the man. He does all these things every day. But there's one thing he can't do, and we're now getting into things in the movie that to me are the most moving. There's a homeless guy. And he befriends this homeless guy a little bit, and then the guy dies. He doesn't want this guy to die. So he takes him to a restaurant and feeds him. The guy still dies. The next day he does something else. The next day he does something else. The next day he takes him to a hospital. And he sits there waiting. And the nurse comes out and says, "Sorry sir, he just passed away." And he doesn't barge, but he really wants to go back through and figure it out, because he knows he can come back and do better next day. It's just a matter of figuring it out. He can and will save this old man, this homeless man. He can't. He can't save this guy. And he has to accept he's immortal and he's omniscient, and yet he can't save this old man. Doesn't stop him running around saving the kid and all the rest of it. But it's recognizing compassion isn't about the outcome of saving the old man. It's about being there with the suffering and just doing what we can. And by this time, many hundreds of years down in the future, he's just fallen in love with Andy McDowell, who is just this delightful, wonderful character in this movie. This is kind of right at the end of the movie. They have a conversation. She ends up spending a long evening with him she ends up spending a long evening with him, and he carves this ice sculpture of her face, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely perfect representation of her face, because of course he's been staring at her for hundreds of years. He knows every contour. So he turns it around and shows it to her, and he says, I've realized I'm happy, and I'm happy because I love you. At this point, he's concluded that he's trapped in this thing. There's no way out. There's no way for this to be a self-gratifying life. And he's learned after many thousands of attempts that Andy McDowell doesn't care much for him at all. Because she remembers, she's seen 24 hours of this. She's got all of his previous stuff at the TV station. So he's given up on all of that. It doesn't matter. But he's happy because he loves her. Reminds me of Nisargadatta, one of my favorite Nisargadatta little exchanges. So he was this self-realized Hindu mystic from the 20th century, and in his little meeting room above his little cigarette store, bindi store. I've got the word wrong, but anyway, his little cigarette store. He'd have these conversations, and one day a physician came in, an elderly physician, probably 70 years old, something like that. And the guy said that it was not a good day. His mum had passed away, and his mum just never loved him. It's like every time things were going well in his life, he thought that he and his mum were going to really connect this time, and his mum would just turn on him. Something would go sideways. She'd always do something at that point to push him away. He said, she just never loved me. And Nisargadatta kept on, as he just wont to, sort of coming at this from different angles and trying to nudge this guy to recognize something. The guy just kept on coming back to the same point. And eventually Nisargadatta just leaned forward and said, you didn't need her to love you. You just needed to love her. And nothing's stopping you. And that is the truth. spend a minute with that lamb. That is the truth. So Bill Murray realized this profound truth right at the end there. He was happy because he had found the ability, the true deep ability to love absolutely and unconditionally. We can get caught up in semantics, and the word might not be love for everybody here, but that ability to just be there, no self, just there for other people, and to love unconditionally. So the following day he woke up with Andy McDowell still in the bed beside him. He was amazed. And the alarm clock went off, and it was the next day. There was 6 foot of snow on the ground. And they were happy as kids, skipping in the snow. And they all lived happily ever after. But I think it's a beautiful movie, and there are some really profound truths in there. So I'm going to stop talking at that point and see if you found